Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni miliwanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you're joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Tell your kids' teachers, their principal, their librarian, and also please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, wherever you find your podcasts. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by The Moon from Dehradun, a story of partition written by Shireen Shamsi. This is a really, really powerful book inspired by the author's family story. This lyrical, moving picture book is a testament to the strength, courage, and perseverance of the over 15 million refugees displaced by the largest forced migration in recorded history. And it shares a young girl's journey from her old home to her new one. This is a really, really powerful story that will inspire lots of fantastic conversations in your home. It belongs in your family library. It belongs in every classroom library. Get your copy today. The Moon from Dehradun, a story of partition by Shireen Shamsi. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Skipper, Friend or Foe, a distracting mystery within life's traumatic events. Written by Kelly Sanchez, it is a Reading with Your Kids certified great read. As an educator and a mother, author Kelly Sanchez put her 20 years of experience working with kids into writing Skipper, Friend or Foe. This is a powerful coming-of-age middle-grade novel that you and your kids will absolutely love. It's going to launch some really important conversations within your family, and it's going to help kids who are going through tough times, letting them know that their feelings, whatever they are normal. You can get your copy today at Amazon. Skipper, Friend or Foe, a distracting mystery within life's traumatic events, written by Kelly Sanchez. It is a Reading with Your Kids certified great read. Join us right now from the beautiful state of California. Our guest is returning to the Reading with Your Kids podcast to celebrate her brand new book. It's called Holy Night and Little Star. Please welcome back Mitali Perkins. Hey, Mitali, how are you?
I'm fine, Jed. Thanks so much for having me back.
Delighted to have you back on. We really enjoyed speaking with you. I think it was about a year ago. And I think at that time we were also celebrating a Christmas-themed book. Am I right?
It was an Easter-themed book.
Easter-themed book. That's right.
It was Bear Tree and Little Wind. And this one is a Christmas, and it's Holy Night and Little Star.
What is it about this love that you have for little things? Being vertically challenged, I'm all for it.
Yes, I don't know, there's something about seeing the world through the eyes of children. I know your show is all about that. How much joy and wonder can come into our lives when we open our eyes to what children see. And that's exactly what I love doing most.
I love that idea that when we're reading with our kids, it's a wonderful opportunity to help see the world through their eyes, because we're reading a book, but if we're doing it right, we're talking to the kids and we're asking them what they think, and we're giving them space to let us know their opinion and how the book is moving them, how the story is making them feel. And that's a great way to imagine how they're viewing the rest of the world. And it's a great way for us to remember just how special all the things that we take for granted are.
That's right. And I think it's more, becomes a two-way teaching and learning when you're reading a book together. If you give that space, I love that word space that you use. If there's space for the child to notice, to respond, I think I remember reading to our boys, I was always surprised, and my world was widened by what they see. There's something about the way children see that is so helpful to us as adults. It's just, so I missed that time reading to the boys because I would see things in fresh new ways. The world would open up to me through their eyes.
Yeah. And, I think our religious holidays, whether they're Christian or Jewish or Muslim, whatever faith that we might have, those holidays in the traditions, we just kind of do them sometimes, and they just become almost automatic, and we're not even thinking half the time when we're doing them. And I think helping to see the holidays through our kids' eyes kind of hopefully reminds us what the true meaning of these different celebrations are.
Yeah, that's right. And there's such a busyness to the season. We're trying to create wonder for them. We're trying to create memories for them, and we're working so hard, and we're focused on how to make it special. But when you hold a book in your hands and you sit down side by side and you're all cuddled up together, it gives you that breathing space to reclaim that wonder for yourself. And that's my hope with Holy Night and Little Star, that grandparents, grandkids, parents, kids can sit together in the busiest season and just take a moment to reclaim the wonder of the galaxies and how incredible Christmas really is.
Yeah. One of the things, Mitali, I say on the podcast when we're encouraging our parents to continue to read with our kids after they become readers, and I oftentimes will say, well, I don't necessarily expect you to cuddle up on the couch with your teenagers to read this book, but and a lot of times we don't realize it, but we are kind of cuddled up very oftentimes with our teenagers, not in the same way we are when they're 5 and 6 years old, but, just kind of sitting on the couch next to each other when our shoulders are touching, looking at something, maybe looking at a photo album or reading a book together or even watching a movie. That's a really kind of special time, and I think it's something I hope that we always are conscious of and aware of. Don't necessarily let your teenager be aware of that, because then they'll run to the other side of the room. But, that's a really special time that I think hopefully we'll all take the time to cherish.
Yeah, there's something about that embodied presence. When dogs do it, dogs love sleeping in your room because they get your scent all night long when puppies. And there's something about that. I always used to think of our boys like when they were teens, sort of as puppies when they're about 1 and they're all rambunctious and they're running around, but they still want your scent. And the stories I kept reading to our boys until they left for college, Jen. And it was the one thing I know I did right as a parent. I didn't do much right, but that I did right because I would read to them while they played video games. I would bring books into their space and sit not too close, but enough to sort of be a puppy pack. And I would just read to them, and I would stop because I'd think there's no way they're understanding or tuning into the story. They're killing bad guys, and they're focused on their video games. And I'd stop, and they'd say, that 14, 15-year-old voice, "Keep reading, Mom. Keep reading." And I would keep reading, and I just did it through until they left for college. And then, Jen, I taught a class on children's books at their college, and it was on picture books. And guess who were the first 2 people to sign up for my class?
Awesome.
Our boys. So I got to continue even through college talking to them about books. So I'm so grateful.
Well, talk to us a little bit about this book. What story are we going to experience when we sit down with our kids and read Holy Night and Little Star?
Yeah, it's a retelling of the nativity story, but it, just as Bear Tree and Little Wind does, it imagines what's happening in the galaxy. So there's the realm of Earth, and that familiar Christmas story, but I'm imagining in this story the realm of the galaxies. And there's a little character named Little Star, and she loves to hang on the horizon really low and shine for the newborn lambs. She's very timid and shy, and she doesn't like change. And then one night Maker says, maker, calls the galaxy together and says, there's going to be a big night and I need all of you. And he keeps asking little star if she wants these jobs, and she keeps saying no, no. And then he tells her he has a special job for her. So it's a story of a character who doesn't want to change, who likes things to be the same, who's scared of anything new. And so for a child who's starting a new school or has a new sibling, any sort of disruption in their life, I hope they'll relate to little star's hesitancy to change, and then her gradual realization that change, some things can stay the same, and the new things are really pretty amazing if you can accept them.
Boy, there's, before I became a parent, I had a real hard time with change. But it's amazing. It's amazing how being a parent causes you to maybe not love change, but just understand that it's inevitable. But also, I mean, if you get to the point that, change can be really a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it's not easy. I am just like little star. I just want to stay in my little spot in the horizon and do my little things. I don't like being, on a big stage or doing a lot of things that cause stress, and yet sometimes we're invited into something that may be a little stressful, but will also be magnificent if we can say yes to it. So I think for people like me that don't like change, and maybe you, people who are a little hesitant to accept invitations. I'm not a bungee jumping kind of girl. I'm a just stay in the shallow end and dabble my toes in the pool and look at the sunshine. So it's good for me though to accept some invitations that are a little bit stretching, because then magnificent things happen, and that's what happens to Little Star. So it's an encouragement to children to maybe be open to saying yes when the right person is asking you, and wait for something amazing. That things don't change that much. You don't change. You go into a new thing, but there's some things that stay the same.
Tell me a little bit about what it was that inspired you to retell this story.
Well, as in Bear Tree and Little Wind, I've always been fascinated with the natural realm. My father was a great lover of nature and taught us how to see it with wonder. He would hold a butterfly. He would come up to a butterfly and say, look at this perfect symmetry. And he taught us how to see beauty and in the stars. And he was just a great lover of the created order. And so he, thanks to that, and I'm new to the Christian faith. I didn't grow up with it. And so the stories of Easter and Christmas, it felt like I wanted to tell them from another perspective, an outsider perspective. Somebody who's not familiar with it, who didn't grow up with all the tinsel and the Santa Claus and the tree. Somebody who's an outsider can sometimes shine a light on a very familiar story. And so I felt an invitation. Do you want to retell these from an outsider perspective? And the vantage point that I chose was the natural order. So with Bear Tree and Little Wind, we're talking about the trees and the winds and how they see Easter. And with Holy Night and Little Star, we're talking about the planets and the stars and how they see Christmas. And so it really is an outsider perspective. And Koa Lei, who illustrated both books, she's an illustrator in Vietnam. She also, too, is an outsider, but she did an amazing job with the colors and the splendor of the galaxies. And then Little Tiny Star, who's so cute. I want her plushie doll of Little Star as she sets off on her adventure.
Tell me, I'm imagining, because I've met people like this who have been immersed. You said that you're new to the Christian faith, and I know lots of folks who've been, immersed in the faith forever, and it's everything about, and they have everything memorized, and they're almost insulted when somebody comes along and is new to the faith and says, hey, what about looking at it this way? What do you think the advantages are to somebody who's been a faithful Christian forever? What are the advantages for them to kind of look at those classic stories that they've heard thousands of times, to look at it through a pair of fresh eyes?
Oh, yes. Again, it's an invitation. And I think that people are hesitant. The more religious we get, the more rigid we get. And that is rigidity, is that sort of like fear of losing control of the narrative. That I think really ticked Jesus off. If you read the New Testament, there's nothing that made him madder than people who were trying to narrow things down and keep people out. And so, yeah, I think allowing yourself, there's two words I love so much. Well, one I don't love, but they're words I play around with in my work and my life. And they're Greek words. One is xenophobia, which is fear of the stranger. And the other is philoxenia, which is love of the stranger or the outsider. And, all throughout the New Testament, you see Jesus calling us to love the outsider. And I think it's just like what we said about children. When you allow somebody else to create space for you to see a familiar thing, like a child reading a story with a child, it deepens your own connection to that story, to that truth, to your faith. So I would say it's a missed opportunity if people don't allow outsiders, don't allow philoxenia to inform their lives and their faith, because then you move to that. The only other option is to get narrow and rigid, and none of us want that. So I would say for people who've been raised in the faith, come along and look through Little Star's eyes at this Christmas story and see if it can breathe some new freshness and some new joy and wonder into a story that you've heard since you were, barely out of the cradle.
Yeah. One of the things that a very wise pastor, I've been blessed to have some wonderful teachers in my life in all sorts of fields, in magic and life, but certainly in religion. And one of them taught me to imagine myself in the stories instead of just listening to the stories. Like, for example, the story of Jesus calming the seas. Instead of just listening to the story again, to imagine myself in that boat and feel the cold water and the wind and the boat being tossed and turned and imagine how scared I was, and then imagine how I would feel when I saw my best friend just kind of snoozing in the back of the boat. He's all chilled out and I think I'm going to die. And it really changes the way that you experience in the story. And I think these stories, whether they're from the Christian Bible, the Hebrew Bible, or the Quran, or any other sacred text, they're meant for us for us to hear them over and over again. But I don't think they're meant for us to hear them in the same way over and over again. I think that they have different lessons to teach us in different points in our lives.
Yeah, I love how you described that. I was right there in the scene with you as you talked about that passage, that familiar passage about the boat. I love that engagement of the imagination. We do, as creatures, have imaginations. I think we're the only species that has that, which relates to us creating things. And because we have an imagination, I really believe we need to engage it. We need to develop it like a language. The language of the imagination it enriches every part of our lives. We can imagine life in somebody else's skin. We can imagine that life of that driver that just cut us off. We can imagine life of that political candidate their childhood. It's such a blessing to us for our whole life to have a strong imagination. And so children come into the world and they are at this window of fluency of imagination. That's why I know you encourage parents to read to children, because they're learning how to imagine as they learn a language faster than we are. They're better at it when they're little. And so traveling with them into the realm of imagination, it allows us to glean some of that fluency, but it's really a small window when we develop that imagination. I was recently traveling. I was very tired, and I'm the kind of person that thinks I will never be scammed. Do you ever hear about people getting scammed? And you think, oh my gosh, how could they have gotten scammed? I would never get scammed. Well, I was so tired. I got a phone call from my bank talking to me about this very kind voice, explaining that I was a victim of fraud and all I had to do was follow these steps, and it was the number of my bank, and the plane was boarding and I was exhausted. And so I clicked. And the next thing I knew, I had lost a chunk of change and it was gone. And this guy duped me. And so I really struggled with that guy's, it was his voice. A voice is such a personal thing. We're talking here. I'm hearing your voice. You're hearing mine. There's only one, we each have our unique voice prints. They're like fingerprints. And I'd heard his voice for like 20 minutes. And I kept thinking about this young man. And I wanted to, first of all, just give him a crack on the face for stealing my money. But eventually I started imagining his life. Why did he get in such this strait? I started imagining his mother. I'm the mother of sons. And then after a lot of imagining I was able to finally pray for this guy after a long time. But it was really my imagination that allowed me to go into that space of moving away from just anger and bitterness. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a key part. It's a key muscle. And so what you just explained about imagining those scenes, I think there's lots of room in the Gospels, especially, that is given to us to put ourselves into those scenes and think about it. And I'm delighted your pastor helped you see that.
Yeah. And, you're talking about using our imagination to go into the minds or imagine the lives of the people who hurt us, not so much to excuse them, but in order for us to be able to forgive them. Mm-hmm. And I think that we forget that when we're forgiving somebody, that it's as much a gift to ourselves as it is to them.
Yes, I remember I had, cause I was a writer in residence for a month in Michigan, and that's where I was headed to, for this trip when the scam happened. And so the first 2 weeks when I was struggling with just wanting this justice be done and let this kid have piles of burning rocks for him, it was terrible. I couldn't sleep. I was so angry that I'd been duped, and my pride hurt because my pride was like, I shall never be scammed. And there I'd been scammed. It was so humbling. I'm like, my mom might be scammed, but not me. Mm-hmm. And so the first 2 weeks were miserable. And then when I was able, I remember that moment. It was at church. It was before taking, the sacrament. And I just asked for grace, and I'd been imagining. And then I went for a walk, and the whole walk, I just imagined this kid, and I imagined his mom, and I pictured her, and it really was a turning point for me where I was finally able to sleep again peacefully after that. So yeah, it is about our peace. Not to excuse, like you said, because it was a bad thing to do. It was to violate, it was violated, and it was a theft, and it was very rotten. I'm not excusing the deed, but I do think that work of imagination does help us to eventually let go of destructive bitterness.
Yeah. I think this conversation that we're having in both of your books and the conversations that we can have with our kids when we're reading your books, I think it is a great way to teach our kids that our faith isn't a costume that we're supposed to put on Sundays or for different religious holidays, that our faith is something that's supposed to be lived. And, I'm a firm believer that, God gave us these instructions not so that we can sit there all day going, God, you're awesome, I love you, because I don't think God has a self-esteem problem. I think God gave us these instructions because if we follow them, we're going to be happier.
Yes, that's right. And yeah, in the books, there's, I try to leave room for that kind of discussion with a parent, like why was Little Star scared when God was inviting Little Star to do something new? How does that feel to be scared, and why? And so there's lots of room to talk about the day-to-day living of our faith from a child's perspective. But as adults, we are scared too. Mm-hmm. And so what's it like to be invited into something new that feels stressful, and we know we're going to say yes, but we're still scared, right?
Yeah.
So, there's room to talk about those things. I think you're absolutely right. It needs to be in our daily lives or it's of no good. And I love the definition of the word shalom. I think it was Alvin Plantinga who said it, that it's doesn't just mean peace, but it means this flourishing life. And like you said, the reason that those things are written is so that we would flourish and thrive and live the best life that we were intended to live. Yeah. So yeah. Absolutely.
I also love the conversation you can have about Little Star being hesitant, being a little afraid to do what God is inviting him to do, and letting our kids know that there are a lot of times we're going to feel as if God is calling us to do something, like forgiving somebody that made us angry or that hurt us, and that it's okay to be afraid of that or even be angry at that invitation, but that we can learn to trust God.
Right, and one of my favorite things in this book is that Maker invites her to do two things before the third thing. You know, picture books always have a rule of three, and she says no, and the Maker accepts her no, that it's okay to say no, and she has the freedom to do it, and it doesn't wreck her life, and it doesn't make it. It's just it's like a relationship. You can say no, and then Maker moves on. And I really love that freedom to say no for a child, even to somebody as big and powerful as Maker. That's human freedom, and that's what we have.
Yeah.
So, and there's grace for that. So eventually when she says her yes, it works out perfectly, but she's able to say no twice for his first two invitations. And I really like that part of the story because, he doesn't overpower her with his, will for her life.
Mm-hmm.
He gives her the freedom to say, no, I'm not ready for that. No, I don't want to do that. And that's absolutely okay.
Yeah. I love it. I think what great conversations we can have with our kids. And we can have really beautiful, powerful conversations like this with our kids, and it'll make all the difference in the world with them. And so thank you for creating this book and these opportunities.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. I know we care about so many of the same things, so it's always fun to talk to you.
Hey, I care about our fans knowing where to go to find out more about you, Mitali. Is there a website people can check out?
Yeah, you can go to my website, MitaliPerkins.com. I'm the only Mitali Perkins on earth, so even if you misspell Mitali, if you put in Mitali Perkins into Google, I will show up. There's no other me combination of those two names. And Penguin Random House has the book. It's available at all booksellers. I'm doing a signing in Nashville, Tennessee this week. And Franklin at Landmark Booksellers on Thursday. I'm doing a signing in Boulder, Colorado on Sunday. So I'm here, there, and everywhere. You can find me. I love meeting little people in person. So please bring the little people and come and meet me. And you can always find me online. Facebook, X and Instagram are good places as well.
I've had a great time speaking to the author of Holy Night, Little Star, the latest book from our guest, Mitali Perkins. Mitali, thanks so much for being back with us.
Jed, thanks for having me. Anytime.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. We are so grateful that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. We'd love for you to connect with us on social media, Facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading with Your Kids on Instagram, at Jedley Magic on Twitter. If you are on LinkedIn, please connect with Jed Doherty. We also have a Reading with Your Kids page on LinkedIn. We would love for you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Authors, click on the Authors Click Here button to find out how you can be a guest here on the show and find out how we can help you celebrate your book with the world. And also, parents, please be sure to visit readingwithyourkids.com to download our free online magazine. Hey, we want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our amazing guest. I also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Chris Doherty, Ann O'Leary, Soji Franklin. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.